1. Backstory. I started working in healthcare for the elderly before I graduated school. At age 17 as a temp worker, and after I graduated I basically worked full-time for several years. Finally got a steady employment at age 23. I take pride in my job, and even though I didn't study medical stuff, I've always made sure I know everything I need to know to do a good job, with online classes, certificates, reading up on medications, treatment recommendations, etc. Everything was going well despite me having 4 different bosses in the first 5 years of work. No one wants to be the boss here. Economically speaking, it's a sinking ship, since it's government-run and dependent on tax money. Then friendly boss Lena joins the story. She asked me to move over to a new department that the state was now, by law, obligated to provide short-term care. She had previously run the emergency unit at the local hospital, and she didn't take crap from anyone. She let us workers build up and run the department because, as any good boss should, she realized that we knew better what we were doing, because we were doing it day to day, and what worked best for us, as long as we stuck within the laws, regulations, staff requirements, and budget, of course. Everything was amazing for almost 2 years. Every month I did the schedules for all 15 of the workers. I did daily planning for all patients. I was in charge of all documentation, and all new guidelines and protocols were being implemented, since the care provided was brand new in our area. Then the day of the great sadness came when Lena declared she was leaving, since she had been offered a job at the local hospital. All of us were devastated to see her go, but, I mean, good for her. That's when Super Bitch, Kaja, enters our story. She was already the boss of all the normal elderly care units, where I'd worked before. I'd already moved on to short-term care before she was hired as boss, and we had heard exclusively bad things about her. We heard she would always do what she thought was the right thing to do, which was almost exclusively wrong, because she was underqualified, had no experience from the actual work, and was just a bitch in general. Our first staff meeting, she told us, "Either you're with me or against me, and the people who are against me, I drown in a lake." Okay, great start. I then tried to explain to her that with our previous boss we'd worked with trust, since Lena had an understanding that us workers actually know what works best in our own department, and Kaja instantly shut it down. "No, I'm the boss, I set the protocols. I decide how my departments run." Yeah, of course, but I'm just saying that we've been working like, "No, I'm the boss, I'm in charge." And so it began. Kaja started changing the schedules, the protocols, the staff requirements, the daily rehab schedule, the food schedule, not joking by the way, and she lowered the required medical competence to work at our unit. This means that there were people working with us who had no prior experience in the job, and no prior experience in the field, barely spoke the language, etc. Keep in mind we had dementia evaluation, palliative care, end-of-life care, stroke rehabilitation, and so on. Malicious compliance. Kaja started to try to micromanage everything we did, literally everything. She cancelled all the activities we did for the whole business, like pub nights for the elderly, movie nights, summer cafe outdoors, walks, store visits, everything. All without cost to the business. She stated that we're no longer allowed to finish the schedules on our own, and gave us 2 weeks less to finish them. Which means we now have 1 week to input the schedule, try to settle it between us 15, and then hand it to her. She'd finish it and hand it to us the day before it went into effect, and 8 out of 10 day shifts weren't covered. Or we were 6 people working the same weekend, supposed to be 3. So I told Kasia that I've been managing the schedule for years, and was happy to keep doing it, and that she'd still have it 2 weeks early. No. I told her that our activities were 100% within paid hours, and no strain on the day-to-day normal business, and we want to keep doing them. No. I told her that we'd prefer to keep doing things as we'd been doing them for years because it worked very well. No. Obviously I was pissed, so were my coworkers, but they never spoke up. That was my job, I guess. There were a lot of incidents that I'm not going to bother bringing up, but just imagine that anything we ever wanted to do for our patients or the people in the dementia units, or for the well-being of the staff was just no. One thing that had been consistent since I started working there when I was 17, 27 at this point in the story, is that when you apply for vacation or any kind of leave, you input the leave request and then you request a temp to cover your shift, and then you inform the boss that you've done both those things. Always been like that. Always. So I did. I requested a day's leave. My mom had a doctor's thing in town a few hours from there. I input the temp request. I walked to the boss's office and informed her. She loses it. Maybe because Kaja's boss was there? I don't know, but she starts yelling, telling me that I'm not allowed to request temps, that's her job. I stand there and I take it like a good employee and say, okay, what happened again? Big surprise for her when the next staff meeting comes around. There suddenly weren't any staff on the actual ward, and a local politician was sat waiting with her mother, who was being committed to my ward that day for over 2 hours. I wonder who made sure they were arriving at that time and that day. I told my boss's boss exactly why there weren't any temps scheduled for the meeting. Kaja got fired. Will make me smile for the rest of my life. 2. After my wife and I got married last year, we decided that we should both get on the same phone plan. We went down to the AT&T store and met with a rep who told us we'd both be on an unlimited plan for $70 a month all in, including taxes and fees. I was very specific about getting the all-in price for the service. It seemed like a decent deal, so we signed up. 2 days later, I log into the website and see that there's already a bill for $139. I call the rep to see what's up, and they tell me that between the activation fees, taxes, and surcharges, the bill was correct. I told them what the salesperson told me, and they basically told me to pound sand. I promptly told them I wanted to cancel the service and wanted the $139 waived. They said they could cancel the service, but could not and would not waive the bill. They also told me if I cancelled immediately, my wife and I would lose our phone numbers, which is true. So I figured since I already have to pay for the month, and I don't want to lose my phone number, I will just get a new carrier and cancel when ready. So I do my research and find Visible, which is excellent, and we make the switch. I call back to AT&T to inform them we have switched carriers and want to cancel the service. I again ask for a refund. The rep informs me that since I've had the service for 4 days that I'm not entitled to a refund. He tells me to read the fine print on the contract, which indeed tells me that I have 3 days to cancel for a full refund. I am now fuming because the first CSR that I talked to on day 2 denied me a refund if I cancelled. I ask for the next level of CSR and they send me to a customer care and retention person. I explain the entire fiasco to him, and how I feel that I've now been lied to twice by AT&T reps, sales rep and first CSR. He's a really cool guy and apologizes and says he'll take care of it, and will completely waive the bill. I'm very thankful, and hang up thinking that this is finally resolved. Fast forward a month, and I get an AT&T bill in the mail saying my payment was not received and is now late. I again pick up the phone and call AT&T. I eventually make my way through 2 CSR reps until I get back to the customer care and retention department. This time I did not have the chill dude, instead I got a very smarmy woman who said that the bill was due and that I'd owe the entire amount. I asked her to please check the CSR notes that the last guy told me he would waive the amount. She put me on a 10-minute silent hold and came back and said she'd escalate the matter to her supervisor. She said I should receive an email by the end of the week with a resolution. 2 weeks go by, no response. I call again. This time I get a very nice lady that is sympathetic. She says she'll waive the bill. She comes back and tells me that she can't do anything because the bill has already been sent to collections. She said not to worry, that she'll send a letter to collections to have them waive the debt. I ask if this will go on my credit report and she says no, and that they'll take care of it. 6 months later, I get a letter in the mail from Sequim Asset Solutions out of Georgia, trying to collect on the $139. I immediately sent him a letter via certified mail demanding that they verify the debt, since it's obviously bad. I hear nothing for 2 months, and then I get an alert that I get a negative mark on my credit. I go in, and sure enough, Sequim has indicated that the amount is in collections. I immediately write letters to all 3 bureaus requesting that they remove the mark. A month goes by, and every single one of the bureaus removes the mark, thank God. Another 3 months go by, and then I get a letter from Sunrise Credit Services in New York, again trying to collect on the debt. This is truly unbelievable because it appears that Sequim couldn't verify it. So instead of apologizing and waiving the debt, they sold it off to another collection agency. I send another certified letter to Sunrise demanding verification. I get nothing in reply. So far, they have not attempted to put a mark on my credit. That's where this part of the story ends. Who knows what will happen next? I could file a lawsuit, but the filing fee alone would be more than the amount owed. Here's the thing, I'm not cash-strapped. I'm blessed enough that I could easily pay the $139 without making a dent in my budget. I have lost 5 times that amount in hours spent on the phone and writing letters. But I am determined to go to the mat with AT&T on principle alone. This brings us to the revenge stage. You see, in addition to my day job as an attorney, I am an elected city councilman in my town. And when I was going over our monthly expenses, I noticed that we were paying AT&T close to $6,000 a month for our phones, internet, and TV services. We're a fairly small town, so it was pretty obvious we were being bent over by these clowns and that we could save a ton of money by switching. I started working with our city manager and IT collector on finding other solutions. We discovered that by switching to various carriers and providers that we could save half. I never would have looked that closely into our telecom expense had AT&T not jerked me around. 2 weeks ago, the resolution to switch was put on our meeting agenda, and the council voted to pass it. We decided to completely cut ties with AT&T. Our city is saving a ton of money, getting better service, and with the money we saved from switching, we were able to hire another part-time animal shelter employee, which we desperately needed. I highly doubt our city would have considered switching if I didn't make such a stink about it. AT&T will end up losing hundreds of thousands over the coming years because of this. Turns out we've actually saved $108,000 per year. 3. I was a supervisor at a movie theater a few years back. I took over a regular non-supervisor shift in concessions, so there was already another supervisor working with me. Me and this supervisor, Adam, were on pretty good terms. We get told by senior manager, Kevin, to fill 2 rolling racks with pre-made trays that we put nachos in. Filling them is simple enough. Unfold trays, place them on aluminium baking sheets so they're ready to be filled, and leave 1 slot empty between sheets. This part is really important because when we put nachos in the trays, we need the space so the chips don't break after we fill them. So Adam and I fill the racks as we normally would and call it good. After this, we roll them in back because we don't need them right now. Adam gets sent home around 2 that day. We were slow as hell, and I take over the stand as supervisor. About 15 minutes later, Kevin calls me in back before I continue. Let's be clear that with many managers, 2 senior managers, several supervisors, and about 60 employees, there is definitely some favoritism going on. Adam was on excellent terms with Kevin, and they talked regularly like they were friends. On a good day, I was on okay terms with Kevin. He didn't hate me, and he was pretty fair with me for the most part. But he wasn't necessarily fond of me either. Our overall professional relationship was pretty rocky. Though I still think he was a good guy. Anyway, not the point. The point is, he calls me in the back to tell me, just me, he made no mention of Adam, that he distinctly told me that he wanted those racks full. Apparently, more full than we normally make them. I would have loved to tell him that this is what we normally do, and Adam said it was good, but I was trying to get promoted at the time, so far be it from me to challenge my senior manager. Plus my anxiety wouldn't allow it. So the first thing I did after getting done with Kevin was to consolidate all the nacho trays as best as I could. After that, we had 1 full rack and 1 virtually empty rack. So I started assembling more trays and filling more sheets. This is interspersed with me trying to get daily jobs done, hopping on register to help out customers and giving people breaks. So about an hour and a half after this, I used up all the clean trays we had. However, the rack still wasn't completely filled per Kevin's instructions. I didn't want to bug Kevin with it because he had other stuff to do. I also didn't know if he would accept this as being done. Something important to note before moving on. We used the baking sheets for a lot of things. We used them to dump out batches of popcorn we had accidentally burnt. We used them for the first batch of the day so people didn't get sick off cleaning chemicals, and the last batch of the night so we could close out more quickly. We also used them to place and pre-count frozen items so we didn't use the counters. There were other things I'm forgetting about, but you get the idea. Then, in my desire to show motivation, relieve my anxiety, and just be a smartass, all provided me with an epiphany, almost as though it were a sign from God himself. I had used all of the clean sheets. There were still some dirty ones that I had not used, but could easily be cleaned, very easily in fact. I then proceeded to clean all of our dirty trays so as to fill the rest of the rack. During this time, the closing supervisor, Katie, comes in. Katie and I used to have a very good working relationship, but in some months prior to this point we had a falling out. We were still polite to each other, but the damage had been done. So, after briefing her on what she needs to know, who on mid-shift had breaks, which movies are busy, etc., I tell her about Kevin's directive regarding the nachos, and she vehemently disagrees. She makes the argument that if I use all of the baking sheets, we won't have for the rest of the week for all the other stuff we need them for. After going back and forth with her for a bit, consulting a third supervisor, and bringing up the fact that Kevin outranks both of us, she says the magic words, "Fine, do what you want, I don't care." What I wanted was to not get bitched at by Kevin again, so I use the rest of the baking sheets for the nacho trays. At this point, we now have none left for anything. About an hour later I see Kevin and tell him that I finished the nacho trays. He just says thanks and continues about his day. So, given the relative importance of having trays, this creates problems for the next few days. Concessions struggles to come up with baking sheets for when we need them, usually only having 2 free at any given point, then having to be washed immediately after use. It also took until Friday, this all happened on a Monday, to sell out of the amount of nachos we needed to have more than 2 usable baking sheets. If you're wondering why we didn't just remove the empty trays from the racks, it was because the managers only brought us the rack with full nacho trays. At the supervisor meeting with senior managers 2 weeks later, Katie mentioned that using every single baking sheet was a bad idea, and that it ought not to be done again. It didn't take her urging by any means, but it was never done again. 4. Circa 2010. I was working an afternoon's gig at a local bank, in part to complete an internship for my coursework. The job entailed running batches of checks through a massive check scanner, manually running a tape using an old calculator called a 10 key with a printing function to make sure the checks matched the deposits, and then hopping over to a computer to correct any errors on the teller or customer's part when the deposits were made. After the bank closed 3 p.m., I was also the one who would stay and print out customer statements and run a long list of processes on multiple machines to update everyone's accounts with the day's transactions, upload the information to the website, back up and run tapes on all the bank's data, and sort and file through the end-of-day reports for the different department managers to review the next morning. I would then lock up the bank and go home. In hindsight, quite a bit of responsibility for a college student, but it was a hometown bank. Now, my manager was a classic Karen before the term existed. She managed through fear, tried to cover it with small talk and banter, and didn't like anyone to shine except herself in the department. My 2 co-workers, full-time bank employees, would always discuss how terrible it was to work for her full-time. Anyway, I was raised to be respectful and work my hardest, which to me meant trying to be as quick at my job as possible, thus saving the company time and money. The closing duties I described took anywhere from 1.5 to 4 hours to complete, depending on which batch of statements we're printing and how often the crappy printers jammed. After about a month of doing this every day, I realized much of this time was due to the checklist which I had been trained with. It was doing one task at a time when actually, more than one process could be done at once, Many times way out of order of the list, but you had to understand everything's part to really see this. I set about making these efficiencies and brought my time down to half an hour to 2.5 hours after 2 months. I thought this would make my manager happy. But nothing was said about me getting out of there faster, so I just kept on doing my job as best I could. Fast forward 2 more months, and this bank is updating its servers to allow for real-time banking. Previously, unless I updated the website each night, balances and transactions wouldn't show up. They brought 2 large server cases into the office I worked in, but it took another 3 or 4 weeks for the actual hardware to come in. Since the old servers were still installed, they set the empty towers right in the middle of our office. Now, our office was a very long room, the statement printers on one side and all the computers I had to work on each night at the other. Remember I said the printers jammed a lot. Well, with all the computers and servers in my end of the office, I never could hear the beep telling me they had jammed. But I could see the red error light. This had historically been my little check. Every few minutes I'd turn around to make sure the printers hadn't jammed. I made sure I did this because every minute they weren't printing was another minute I'd be working. The statements took longer to print than the rest of my duties combined. However, the way they placed the empty towers blocked my view, forcing me to have to get up and walk halfway to the printers each time to make sure they were jammed. So I simply turned them 90 degrees. Since the front and backs were full of air ventilation holes, this allowed me to maintain my line of sight, saving me and the bank time. Once again, I thought, great idea. No one is using these yet, and when they do, they won't be in that location anymore anyway. In hindsight, I should have known better. I came in around 2 p.m. after classes the next day. I noticed the towers were turned back. I thought that was odd. Why would anyone turn them back? I asked my coworker and she told me the manager was pissed I had touched them without asking, which, as I've learned later in life, was fair enough, but still an overreaction. I asked had them being turned messed up some workflow I wasn't thinking of, but no. She hadn't even noticed them until about 11 a.m., when another employee mentioned they'd been turned, so her reaction was pure malice for not having been asked. When she saw I had come in, she pulled me aside and asked aggressively why I had touched them. So, thinking this was my chance to highlight my efficiencies, told her all I had done in an effort to make the closing routine more efficient. That was evidently the wrong answer. I was instructed to do the checklist exactly how it was laid out with no changes whatsoever, because that's how it was supposed to be. Even though I had been doing it my quicker way for 2 months already with no downsides. With regard to the printer, she told me to stop being lazy and just get up and walk to check on it. Cue malicious compliance. I stopped caring about speed, followed the checklist to a T, and unless I had somewhere to be, didn't worry about checking the printer very often. If it was still printing after my closing checklist was done, I could always read or do homework at my desk. Wouldn't want to be efficient with the bank's payroll after all. Suffice to say, it went back to taking 1.5 to 4 hours per night, and costing the bank much more money in my checks. Good for me, I guess. Shortly after, I found a job working in an electronics department at a superstore, and switched over with 2 weeks' notice. There wasn't time to train a new person, so that manager had to take over the night routine until a new one could be found. During my last day, I took it upon myself to try and give her some constructive criticism in how her management style affected me, and stopped me from caring about my job. I'm not sure it was effective, but at least I got it off my chest. I ran into one of my former co-workers at the store a few months later, and evidently, someone else had out and out told my former manager she was a vile and mean person, and was probably going to hell for how she treated people. Part of her Karen persona was being very religious, and this seemed to have scared her into at least some meekness, at least according to my former co-worker. 5. So this was a long time ago. In a workplace I try very hard to block out of my memory, but this is one of the great situations that I remember. This place was a warehouse for an automotive assembly plant, where we workers would place parts into order on carts so they can be used on the production line in the order the cars are being built. This process, when done perfectly, is very efficient and makes the line run smoothly. However, nothing is ever perfect, and this process can also make things run very poorly. This is one of those times. It is important to note that the warehouse is staffed by a different company than what runs the assembly plant. While things are normally calm between the two companies, situations like this tend to get a bit heated with the warehouse company facing penalties for screw-ups. Background. One of the areas where we sequence the parts for the lines comes from a group of people who put the parts how they are supposed to be on the cart. That cart is loaded into a trailer. The trailer is brought to the plant, unloaded, and the carts are sent to the line while empty carts are loaded back on the trailer and sent back to our warehouse. This system works pretty well, but there is some room for improvement. Process Manager Doofus decides that he has the answer to this problem in the form of a new way to load and unload the trucks, and goes about telling all of the people in his department to do things his way. No attempt to revise the standard process, just do it his way. Now, the people who work this area know what they're doing. They do this job all day long and can see where the Doofus method is going to have the materials loaded in a fashion that will waste a large amount of time. Upon pointing this out, Doofus angrily waves their concerns away and spouts the now famous line, "It looks good on paper, so it will work just fine." He then proceeds to stand around to make sure things are done his way, and when things start to fall behind due to his error, shouts at the people for not following his scheme. He then leaves for lunch with the promise that he will be back, and if they follow his process exactly, things will get on track and improve. Malicious compliance. Now, the Doofus method is not the standard method for doing this job. We have process manuals printed that show the mostly ideal method of doing things, and deviation from that should be limited to only processes that prove to be effective in reducing time as seen by process analysts. Everyone knows that the Doofus method is not going to work, so standard compliance would be to go back to the process listed in the manual. But this is malicious compliance. Everyone involved in this process decided to follow the Doofus method exactly, despite the fact that everyone knows where this will end up. As predicted, things start falling behind more and more, and when Doofus returns, he finds a department that is on the verge of shutting the line down. He begins yelling at anyone and everyone for not following his precious method, and responds to any challenges with, "But it looks good on paper, it has to be something you're all doing." The fallout. As things start getting more and more backed up, the manager at the plant has noticed things are not as they should be. She drives over to our warehouse to find what is going on, and why this department that normally does not have any issues is having issues. "Why are things getting so backed up over here?" "The line is close to stopping." "We started a new system of doing things, and someone is not following the process." "Is this the standard process for this area? Why am I just now hearing of this?" "It's a new method that I came up with. It should be saving time." "Well, it's not. Go back to the standard process." "But it looks good on paper. If we can find out what's happening, we can get it fixed." "We don't have time to figure out where your idea went wrong. We need to get moving. Go back to the standard process."
But the paper...
I don't care about your fucking paper. Go back to the standard process. Doofus retreats to his office, everyone goes back to the normal process, and the situation is sorted within an hour. We later find out that Doofus has been reamed by our facility manager, our quality manager, the assembly plant manager, the assembly process manager, and just about everyone else that holds even the slightest authority over him, since he never discussed with anyone what he was doing, what he was planning, and never had permission to do what he did. The phrase, "it looks good on paper," has since become a running joke between the workers there, and Doofus was fired a few months later due to unrelated issues. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 50. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, I think I should celebrate by making this video by having some ice cream. Number 50, not bad. I'll eat 50 different flavors. Alright, that'd be excessive. Just 50 different tubs of one flavor. Gradually over the course of a few years. You know, I really must get better at celebrating milestones. I still haven't ordered myself a little treat for hitting 4 years full time. Although perhaps this isn't the most ideal time to be having treats the way that I usually would anyway. I'll come up with something, I'm sure. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.